So therefore, accordingly, I call this meeting of the Indigenous and Northern Affairs Committee to order. And we begin as usual by acknowledging in Ottawa, we meet when we meet there on the traditional territory of the Algonquin people. I'm located in the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Chinantan First Nations. Pursuant to the order of reference from the House on December the 10th, 2020, the committee is continuing to study Bill C-8, an act to amend the Citizenship Act, Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's Call to Action number 94. And to ensure that the meeting is orderly, especially for our guests just joining us, it's critical that we have a clear and proper translation. So that requires you to locate the interpretation icon, which is in the bottom center of the screen, and select the English, which I'm going to do right now, or French, whichever you wish to speak and hear the language in. And having said that, the other thing that I want to assure you is that we keep fairly strict on the timing issues in order that the complete cycle of questions gets through. And so it may seem like, why are we cutting off answers that are important, and they are all important, but we do need to have the timing issues in place, which are rounds of questions of 6 minutes, 5 minutes, 2.5 minutes, and so on, and that all of our questioners get in. So with our guests having that information, we're going to open up with 6 minutes of presentation, starting off with Ms. Poitras. Please go ahead for 6 minutes. I believe you're, Marlene, I think you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. Danse Tatamskat Naukakio, members of the committee, friends and relatives, thank you for inviting me here today to share the perspectives of the Assembly of First Nations. I'm honored to be on the unceded territory of Treaty Number 6. So before discussing the proposed legislation, I would like to give committee members a brief history of the Assembly of First Nations, advocacy and leadership that led to the creation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to actions, and the reason why we are all here today. Prior to the creation of the TRC, the AFN was a party to the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement. At that time, we stressed that compensation alone would not achieve the goals of reconciliation and healing. Rather, a comprehensive approach also requires truth-telling, healing, and public education. From this, the TRC was created, resulting in 94 calls to action. I thank everyone involved in the commission, including recently retired Senator Mary Sinclair. It has now been almost 6 years since the release of the final report of the TRC and its calls to action. While progress to implement all 94 calls has been slow, I am hopeful that this government's recent attempt to implement call to action finally proceeds. We cannot waste time anymore. Ensuring First Nations are included in Canada's citizenship oath will go far to symbolically affirm that First Nations have known all along, and what is already affirmed in Canada's Constitution, our Aboriginal and treaty rights have existed prior to the creation of Canada. Here in Alberta, Treaty 6, 7, and 8, First Nations are sovereign peoples and nations. Treaty was signed to allow us to share the land, allow for peaceful coexistence. What they are not was an agreement by First Nations to give up their sovereignty, laws, forms of governance, or right to self-determination over their lands and their people. And so while true reconciliation goes beyond implementing all 94 calls to action, implementing this initiative will better enable new Canadians and First Nations in beginning that journey of peaceful coexistence. Each year, hundreds of thousands of people decide to become Canadian citizens. Hundreds of thousands of people decide to call Canada their home by taking the citizenship oath. I have heard from many who have attended these citizenship ceremonies who remark on the emotional significance of this day. Many of these people have their own experiences of colonization and its effects. Many of these people share First Nations love and respect for each of our sacred lands, languages, cultures. For every year this initiative is delayed, we are delaying our ability to meet one another, our ability to start on this journey of peace and prosperity. The AFN hasn't been involved in discussions on the citizenship oath since 2016. We have worked with the Honourable Minister and his predecessors, the Inuit Tapiriit Kananadami and the Métis Council, to develop language that reflects our unique histories and contributions to Canada as Indigenous peoples. The language contained in the bill differs from language put forward by the AFN. In 2017, our executive committee provided the following language as a guide. I swear or affirm that I will be faithful and bear truth allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, Queen of Canada, her heirs and successors, and that I will faithfully observe the laws of Canada, including the inherent rights, title, treaties, and agreements with First Nations, and the rights and agreements with Métis and Inuit peoples, and fulfill my duties as a Canadian. The inclusion of inherent rights, titles, treaties, and agreements is important as it affirms Canada's legal obligations to First Nations. These obligations are shared by Canadian citizens as well. As National Chief Perry Bellegarde so often says, we are all treaty people. That is why the AFN has been involved in providing guidance to Canada on changes to its citizenship test and accompanying materials as called for in Call to Action number 93. We are hopeful that with the passing of this legislation, newcomers can begin to use the citizenship test and guide to develop a better understanding of the legacy of our many contributions to Canada and the potential we all have in working and prospering together. I am also aware of the role the Citizenship Guide plays in its use as an educational tool in elementary and secondary schools across many parts of Canada. The time is now to implement these changes. Canada is reconciling with its past and renewing a commitment to a future free of racism, discrimination, and intolerance. It is only through ensuring that Canadians understand this past and the ongoing injustices that we can move forward together. This legislation represents a significant step. The only way we can truly reconcile past and ongoing injustices is by all of us, Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples alike, working together to find a way forward. I look forward to answering your questions. Hi, nanaskum nawa.
I'm sorry, Mr. St. Pierre, the National Chief of the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples.
I'm sorry, Mr.
Please
Chair.
go ahead.
Chief Poitras is our only witness for this panel.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, Chief, I apologize for that, and I'll do that formal introduction in the second part. I thought that perhaps we were moving the panels around. So with that, we will start our round of questioning, 6-minute round, first of all, with Raquel Dancho. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Chief Poitras, for your excellent remarks. I took a lot of notes, so I really appreciate the thought that went into those. I have a number of questions I'd love your perspective on, and you touched on it a little bit at the end. I wasn't familiar or aware of the recommendation for the oath change from the AFN. I found it very interesting. It's much different than what the government has put forward. And I know in number 94, as everyone knows, but I just for the purposes of the committee, I'll state it again. It was going to be just 4 extra words, including treaties with Indigenous peoples. And now we have, including the Constitution, which recognizes and affirms the Aboriginal and Treaty Rights of First Nations, Inuit, Métis, and then it goes on to finish. I just want to get your thoughts generally on, do you like how it's being put forward now? Would you perhaps want a different change somewhere between what you put forward and what's there now? Just general comments on how you think it looks and if you think it's if it's good to move forward.
Well, I recognize the Constitution is the highest laws of Canada, and treaty and Aboriginal rights are recognized in there, and so I'm good with the way the wording is, but if we can include inherent rights, because we believe that our inherent rights were is something that's that bestowed on us from time immemorial, and that treaties came after that, and those treaties were made with the Crown. So if Canada wants to include the Canadian Constitution, they also have a fiduciary obligation for that. So I'm fine with that.
I appreciate that. And we have we've been looking at the last 5 years, and you had mentioned that you were first consulted in 2016. Our understanding is that's when it began, and then we've had sort of 3 introductions of very similar bills in that time through 3 ministers. So we're finally, after 5 years of work, at the committee stage, which is quite far from the end of passing it in and getting it royally proclaimed into law, and then having new citizens say the word. So we're still a far ways off. I have concerns that if there's a spring election or something like that, we might get further delayed and have to start from the beginning. Do you have any concerns about the length of time that this one step is taking? We have 94, and I'm just concerned that if we keep going at this pace, we'll never get there.
Yes, I do have a concern, because to me this is an easy thing to do, because you just have to change the wording or insert the wording that to include Aboriginal and treaty rights. So to me that's that shouldn't take long. It shouldn't have taken this long. And yes, I do have a concern, because for true reconciliation to occur, I believe that this will be a great first step in that process, and it will be beneficial for all of us.
Absolutely. And last week in committee, the minister did mention a bit about number 93, which is kind of goes hand in hand a little bit with the citizenship oath. It's the citizenship guide that new Canadians, as you know, have to study to take their test and officially become Canadian. Have you been consulted on what would be included in a new citizenship guide at all in the last 5 years?
Not myself, not that I'm aware of, or the executive. However, I believe that the national chief has been involved in those discussions directly with the minister.
Okay. And what would you like to see included in that from your perspective? I know there's probably many, many things, but just for the purpose of the committee, if you can give us a few examples, that would be great.
Well, our people, First Nations people, are ceremonial people, and which is indicated in when we negotiated those treaties. It was done in a ceremony. The land acknowledgement, that people do now is ceremonial in itself, and so to me, what I would like to see is an official welcoming from whether it's from our elders as part of that welcoming process, and for the new citizens to Canada.
Great idea. I think that would be lovely. And I think what you mentioned about ceremony, I think it's wonderful to move through the truth and reconciliation process because we have so much pomp and circumstance in the Westminster style democracy that we have. And to start incorporating the ceremony from Indigenous peoples, I feel just really elevates it and makes it even more historical and important. So I really appreciate those comments. And I know that the opposition parties will be ensuring that the government puts significant thought into what they include in the citizenship guide. And I hope that you are consulted and that the ceremonial importance, that part of it is introduced to new Canadians who may not be familiar with many of the ceremonies of First Nations people in this land. So I appreciate your comments very much. And we have about 15 seconds left, but was there anything else you'd like to share in conclusion?
No, I think, I don't know, it's exciting that this discussion is occurring, even though it's, come to the table for the third time. So I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic that, this time it will go forward.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Chief.
Thanks, Ms. Poitras. Thanks, Ms. Dancho. And Mr. Pawlowski, you have 6 minutes. Go ahead.
Well, thank heavens I'm number 2 and not number 3 or 4, because with one paragraph here, it's getting harder and harder to ask new questions. Ms. Dancho stole both my questions. I thought after one, well, I still have the second one. Then she went on to ask the second one too. So I'm really ticked off here. So I'm hunting, and even more complicated is Ms. Poitras, Chief Poitras has already said with respect to the issue of including reference to the Constitution, it doesn't seem like something that the Assembly of First Nations wants to die on this hill, that they're okay with reference to the Constitution. Now, my understanding is Aboriginal rights are inherent rights. The Constitution is, in reference in Section 35 to Aboriginal rights, is pretty broad. Moreover, it's years ago since I went to law school, but as I recall, the Constitution is a growing tree, so the definition can evolve over time. So I would have thought that reference to the Constitution would be more inclusive and more desirable than limiting that wording. So, but again, I think maybe you can just confirm you're okay with the reference to the Constitution, because I think that's a big thing before a committee, the big question, and I know the Bloc doesn't really want it there. So,
yes, in doing my research and reading about the Bloc and their concern with the Constitution, but we have to acknowledge that inherent rights and treaty rights preceded the Constitution and it is contained in there. But then there's also a number of court cases that affirms First Nations treaty rights and title and Aboriginal rights and title. So I think that it's incumbent on on the legislators to ensure that these aspects are included in this bill.
Now the second question, and I guess again Ms. Dancho touched on it, but I want to maybe word it a different way. The citizenship guide is what all new Canadians, before they become citizens, this is what they study, and it asks a bunch of esoteric questions like why they make steel in Hamilton, and I kind of look at why are they asking these kind of questions? But this is an opportunity for new Canadians to kind of get to know the country, to set out what we think the important things about being Canadian are. What would you say if you were talking to a new immigrant, what would you like them to know about Indigenous people and their contribution to Canada?
Well, I want to share a story with you I had with my hairdresser who is going through the immigration process in Canada. And she was telling me a bit about what she was learning, but had no idea about the residential schools. So I proceeded to educate her, and she did do some research, and when I did come back to see her, like, she was telling me all what she learned. So to me, Indigenous people, through signing of the treaties, have contributed to Canada, and I think that it's time that that's recognized. We continue to contribute, and by signing those treaties and agreeing to live in peaceful coexistence, it says a lot about Aboriginal people or First Nations people in this country, and it's important that that's recognized. But it's also very important that people learn about our history. When you talk about truth and reconciliation, it's about truth and going to the past. And as bad as it was, it's also important that we acknowledge it and reconcile and move on, so that we can become partners and live in peaceful coexistence as it was determined in those treaties.
Do I have any time left, Bob?
You got 1 minute before I get to my explanation of the question you posed.
I guess the next question, you've covered a couple of things that you'd want in the citizenship guide. Could you think of other parts of Indigenous history which you think Indigenous people would want new Canadians to know about because they might not know of it? And especially considering I'm in Thunder Bay, we have a large Indigenous population, but a lot of parts of Canada, like most immigrants, go to Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver. Anything else in the history that you would say that we're particularly proud of and want new Canadians to know about?
Well, in the our history precedes any of the books that were written. Like, for example, when I go home, there was books that were written from the nuns or the priests, and it just starts from their era, and our ancestors fought hard for the land. They maintained the land and entered into agreements with the newcomers. So I think it's very important that our culture, our traditions, and how we are very welcoming, to anybody, and want to work together in a good way.
Thanks so much, Ms. Patra. We had limestone, which is an ingredient in a blast furnace with the iron ore in a sheltered harbor. But our geology also gave us flint, which was important for the Chinantan First Nation. They traded in flints. And with that, we move on to Madame Normandin. 6 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Merci, Chef.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chief Poitras, for your testimony, which I listened to with a great deal of interest. It was very clear and well documented. If I may, I'm going to go into a short preamble, before asking my question to explain where the Bloc Québécois comes from. I would say that when the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples was discussed in Geneva, the Bloc Québécois was there. I was part of the working committee that formulated this declaration. We were also there in Geneva in 2006 for its adoption. In 2007, the agreement was finalized. Canada did not ratify it. The Bloc put pressure on the government, asked questions of the Harper government, until in 2010, Canada did sign the declaration. So this is certainly something that we have been supporting for many years. In the same way, we agree with the recommendations, the calls to action in the Truth and Reconciliations report, and we support the principle in C8, which is to recognize the rights of First Nations in the citizenship oath or affirmation. I would like to hear your view on the exact wording. You did talk about it. Perhaps the way in which it's read, what's recognized is the Constitution, within which Aboriginal rights treaty and other rights are set forth. Would you prefer Aboriginal rights, ancestral and treaty rights, to be recognized directly rather than having the Constitution recognized directly?
Well, like I said previously, the Constitution is the highest law of Canada, and treaty rights are recognized in there, treaty and Aboriginal rights, and to me, that's that already exists, and that is just a matter of taking those words and incorporating them into the citizenship oath. I'm to me personally, as long as the treaty and inherent rights are acknowledged, I think that goes a long way to, for Canada. That's a good start in terms of acknowledging that we have treaty and inherent rights in this country. So however that, the wording is in the end, to me, I'm fine as long as our treaty rights are included.
Parfait. Et justement, je vais faire.
Perfect. I just want to be sure that we understand one another properly. The rights of First Nations were not created by the Constitution. They existed well before that, because the First Nations are nations, and it is as nations that they have rights. So when we talk about inherent rights, that's what you mean, the existence of those rights before the Constitution existed.
Yes, I mean, from my understanding and what I was told by my my family, my great-great-grandfather signed adhesion to Treaty Number 8 in July 13, 1899, and he did that as on behalf of our nation, who it was only nations that can enter into treaty, but yes, we have inherent rights to the land, and that's from when we're born with, and treaties preceded that, and even preceded the Canadian Constitution.
Parfait. Et on se reconnaît là-dedans comme minorité.
And as Quebecers, we recognize ourselves in this as a minority, because any time that we defend your rights as those of a nation, we feel as if we're defending the rights of Quebecers as a nation. So is that what's essential? Is it recognition of the rights of First Nations? Does that confirm the existence of those rights as having been there for centuries, rather than recognizing the Constitution? Is that what needs to be done?
Well, the recognition of the rights is something that my ancestors have been fighting for hundreds of years, east and west, and it's, I believe that it's high time that those rights are recognized, and but not only recognizing them, but then also implementation of the treaty, implementation of these rights. To me, that is very important in the reconciliation process.
Et peut-être rapidement, est-ce qu'on...
Quickly, perhaps, could we say that there is still some work to be done with the Constitution, because the Constitution has not recognized all the rights of First Nations?
Well, I mean, the Constitution, Section 35, does incorporate the treaty and Aboriginal rights, and I believe it's also includes the Métis and the Inuit. So I think it's just a matter of treaty implementation. For example, one of the things that we've always strived for was to have a treaty implementation policy, because as you're aware of the history, the Indian Act was put into place even before Treaty Number 8 was signed. And we were put under that. So for Canada to set it right, they have to, put some policy or some recognition that treaties exist in this country, are in Canada's Constitution, which is the highest law of the land. So in our belief, the treaties are also the highest law of the land.
Thanks, Ms. Poitras. And we go to Ms. Kwan now for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much, Chief Poitras, for your comments. Indeed, they're very informative, I think, for this committee. As we're talking about the Constitution, so Section 35 reads, the existing Aboriginal and treaty rights of Aboriginal peoples of Canada are hereby recognized and affirmed in this Act, quote, Aboriginal peoples of Canada, unquote, includes the Indian, Inuit, and Métis peoples of Canada. And so that's the language in which Section 35 is indicated. Now, in your comments, you raised the issue around inherent rights, to which I absolutely agree. There needs to be full recognition of inherent rights of the Indigenous peoples. And so in terms of the wording for the of the text for the changes for the swearing in, would you say what would you think if these words were added to add the words inherent rights of Indigenous peoples as recognized by the UN Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and to add those words after the language that says that I will faithfully observe the laws of Canada, and then insert the words inherent rights of Indigenous peoples as recognized by the UN Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and then to carry on to say including the Constitution, etc. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, UNDRIP is currently being discussed. I believe that it was introduced in December, and that is something that especially the Treaty First Nations have some issues because they believe that treaty is an agreement and that exists, and nothing has really moved forward with the recognition of our treaties, even though we've been advocating for that in a number of years. So I would, in terms of if you wanted to include that wording, I would ensure that the First Nations leadership, especially those with treaties, are consulted. Just because there are some issues, and I believe that in order to incorporate language into the citizenship oath, you have to have some agreement, from people that just gives them the satisfaction that it's something that's worthwhile to include.
Okay, and so there's concern with the using the words UNDRIP. So then you would rather than just simply to say inherent rights of maybe using the same language of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Would you prefer that instead then? Just simply to recognize the inherent rights without reference to UNDRIP?
That's what because the issue of UNDRIP is still being discussed, and legislation has been introduced, and it hasn't received royal assent yet, and so there's still consultations. There's still the process that needs to continue, where there will be appearances before committee. So I would rather allow that to unfold before anything is mentioned. I mean, to include other types of agreements that are not agreed to by everybody collectively moving forward.
Okay, and so maybe you can just advise then the committee specifically what are the words that you would like to see change in the citizenship oath as proposed, so that it reflects the inherent rights as you mentioned earlier.
Well, the language that the AFN Executive Committee recommended is, I'll just read the addition, okay? So it's including the inherent rights, title, treaties, and agreement with First Nations, and the rights and agreements with Métis and Inuit peoples. So that's
got it.
That was the recommendation from the AFN Executive.
Got it. Thank you very much. Okay. Now I'd like to turn to the issue around education. We
Just
mentioned
30 seconds, Ms. Kwan. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Beyond the citizenship guide, do you think there are other actions that the government should take in terms of education for newcomers?
Well, I think that the true, like I said, the true history needs to be told, and we also have our cultures and ceremonies, and I believe that to have a well-rounded education is really important, so that newcomers can understand who we are and also take pride that they're coming into a country where Indigenous peoples are part of the Canadian fabric.
Thanks so much. And now we go to the 5-minute round with Mr. Viersen and Mr. Batiste first up. Mr. Viersen, go ahead for 5.
I want to thank our witness for being here today. I really appreciate you coming out. So it's good to have a fellow Albertan here. Just around the how the Constitution comes into this. There's been a lot of discussion around that. Is there unanimity within your organization as to the inclusion of that word?
Well, I'll have to go back to the aspect that I just recently read out, and that is what we agreed to as the executive, and for me to have to give you a good well-rounded answer on that, I'd have to probably consult with the executive on that.
Sure. I'm interested in pursuing the idea around ceremony a little bit. We have a ceremony for when you take the oath. What's your idea of how we would incorporate? Like often we have government officials at that ceremony. We have RCMP and the Red Surge at that ceremony. What's your idea on how we would incorporate the Indigenous perspective into that?
Well, we have so many ceremonial elders, and of course, it would have to be from the traditional area of where that ceremony is being conducted. The elder, it would, you would ask an elder from that region to be involved and to do an official welcome. In our ceremonies, we have various ceremonies for things, whether it's to welcome people, or it's just or even with agreements like we had in the treaties. So there's different aspects of that, and like I said before, I think it would go a long way to have Indigenous ceremonies included.
The TRC recommendation has specific wording for the citizenship ceremony oath. The current bill that's before us does not reflect that wording directly. And then your recommendation is different again. was there an issue with the TRC discussions when they were drafting that wording? I know we had the people from the TRC here, and they said that it was more of a suggestion than definitive. Were you at all involved in that discussion with the TRC and how they came to their wording?
No, I wasn't involved at the time. No.
Okay. And so I'm just trying to figure out why there's daylight between your wording, the TRC's wording, and now the government's proposed wording.
I'm not sure how, because personally I haven't been involved in those discussions. So my like I said, my preference, wouldn't, as long as we have our treaty rights and agreements, existing agreements and the title with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, to me that would go a long way.
Very good. Mr. Chair, if I could, I put a motion on notice in the last meeting, and I was just wondering if we could dispose of that motion at this point. So I'd put a motion on notice that pursuant to the Standing Order 108, this committee undertake a study on the cancellation of the Keystone XL pipeline, its potential loss, the potential loss of the Line 5 pipeline in Northern and Indigenous communities, and that this study take into account, but not be limited to, the impact on Indigenous businesses, jobs, economic prosperity, self-determination, mutual benefit agreements, as well as the efforts of the federal government to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and that this committee report this to the House. I was just wondering.
If you're asking me, Mr. Viersen, my preference is that we don't lose the energy and direction that we've created with the meeting so far. I think we're having an excellent meeting on a complex topic.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would prefer to hold that off for now and find an appropriate place to pick it up, if that's okay with you.
That would be fine with me if you're willing to bring it up at the end of the meeting. This is my time for when I have the floor, and so therefore I'm moving that motion. But if you're willing to agree to meet with me for some time at the end of the meeting, I'd be happy to move it then.
We can do that, and thanks very much. And now we go to for 5 minutes to Mr. Baptiste. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chief Portress, and thank you for presenting in front of us. I think we're learning a lot. And I just want to thank you for your leadership as well. I was part of the Assembly of First Nations National Youth Council when we were discussing the Indian residential school settlement. And I learned so much from the regional chiefs, as well as National Chief Phil Fontaine at the time, about the importance of education and the importance of the Indian residential school settlement. And as part of the co-chair, of course, I was part of the AFN executive at the time. So we've heard a great deal about the importance of education as part of this bill. And this is, as you are well aware, that the Constitutional Law Canada, which you've said a few times now, is the highest law of Canada and the supreme law of Canada. Because with a lot of people focus on Section 35 of the Constitution of Canada, which recognizes and affirms the Aboriginal and treaty rights, but I don't feel people acknowledge and put as much weight into Section 52, the supremacy law that you were referring to, that recognizes that Aboriginal and treaty rights, which include inherent and Aboriginal title and all of the things that AFN has talked about, are actually the supreme law of Canada. Do you feel that enough Canadians, new Canadians or old Canadians, understand that treaties and Aboriginal rights are the supreme law of Canada? Do you think that there's enough information about that?
No, I don't think there's enough information that, and you're right, education is so important. I know through the treaty commissions in Saskatchewan and Manitoba have done an excellent job in educating, about our treaties as being a supreme law of Canada. But I believe that there needs to be more mass education so that people can understand it, and starting, with the newcomers would be a great place to start.
That's great. Well, I want to hold up something that I have from Treaty Education Nova Scotia. And as part of our initiative, which is, you mentioned the other treaty commissions, Saskatchewan and Manitoba, we give this pamphlet out to all new Canadians that talks about the terminology, talks about our ancestral homelands, talks about the Constitution as treaty. Do you think that would be a good step in Alberta to take on for all Canadians to really understand, the different treaty areas in your area, as well as understanding the terminology that's appropriate when dealing with Indigenous people? Do you think that's an important step moving forward?
Absolutely. I think anything that we can do to educate others. We've also in Alberta have a lot of traditional land use studies that were done, and it speaks to the history of the ancestral lands and our history of hunting and trapping and because we were nomadic people and we traveled around, and so those traditional land use studies are very important because it provides a lot of information about our history.
And our advocacy as First Nations has been through for generations. But as part of that, we advocated very strongly for Section 35 and Section 52's inclusion in that Constitution. Do you feel that including reference to the Constitution and reference to Indigenous Aboriginal and treaty rights as the supreme law of Canada, which covers inherent title and other, do you think that respectfully acknowledges the inherent and treaty rights across Canada of Indigenous people in a way that new Canadians could understand?
Yes, because the new Canadians will be learning, about our laws and treaties are already recognized within the Constitution, so that I believe that in educating the newcomers, that's key, and like I said previously, I'm really excited, for this process and that these discussions are occurring, because it should have happened 100 years ago.
Okay, with that, I just want to say thank you, Chief Portress, as well as if you could give my best to one of my favorite Albertans, Leroy Littlebear from Banff. He's one of the people who I depend on for a lot of knowledge and has been so instrumental in me understanding so many different concepts within Aboriginal law and constitutional law. Thank you.
I will. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Normandan, you have 2.5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, and thank you again, Chief Poitras, for your answers to my previous questions. I would like to know if we take the exact wording in a call for action number 94. I understand that the result would not have been perfect, but would it have been acceptable as a bill? Is that something with which you would have been comfortable, even if it had not been perfect?
Yes, like I said, my goal, because like I mentioned previously, my great grandfather, signed adhesion to treaty and to include treaty in the citizenship oath, as it is already included in the Canadian Constitution, that that would go a long ways, because our ancestors fought hard. And I know of elders, myself, who taught me a lot about treaty, who have passed on, and they said that they've been at it for 50, 60 years of their life advocating for this to occur. And so with it happening now, it's exciting, and I'm glad to be a part of that.
Merci. Et pour la suite du travail, vous avez mentionné, bon, effectivement, il y a...
You also said that there is a constitutional issue when it comes to the Bloc Québécois, but all of us are working together on this bill. Do you feel that it would be good for us to be unanimous on this bill and perhaps have it passed even more quickly so that it will get through before any elections might be triggered?
Absolutely, and I think that by all parties coming together unanimously on this, it's a good indication that that our treaties and our inherent rights are being recognized the way that it should have been done long time ago, and I believe that that will go a long way in building the trust and with First Nations and or Indigenous people in Canada.
Merci beaucoup. Je pense que c'est tout.
Thank you. I think that's all the time I have, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chairman, rather.
2.5 minutes now for Ms. Kwan. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up on the last question I was asking about education, I wonder, aside from the content around the rights of Indigenous and Métis and Inuit peoples, I'm wondering, are there any specific initiatives that you think the government should embark on, actions to do that education?
Well, I think it would go a long way to sorry, I'm getting some feedback here, but to have the education start at the schools, at the grade schools where children can start to learn about our history, and to me that would be a good start in if we had that education within the curriculum, it would help in addressing the systemic racism that exists, and so that people can learn about our history and learn about the contributions we've made to Canada.
Do you think the Canadian government should produce in this educational material for the provinces and territories? Right now, as it stands, each province sort of have their sort of own take on educational material. So there's no standardized sort of educational materials out there. So I'm just wondering whether or not there should be a body who will do that work, and so that is consistent and utilized across the country.
Well, I think that's good, but each territory has different aspects to their history. So you can't just introduce something that's going to be this is the history, but it also has to incorporate other aspects. And one of the greatest tools that I've seen is from the Treaty Commissioner in Saskatchewan, where they have they have all this material, and it's excellent material, and I think that would be a good place to start. But each region, I believe, would have to do their own because of their unique history in this country.
Thanks very much. Mr. Vidal, 5 minutes, please. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Chief Poitras, for being here today. The conversation has been very valuable, and I'm going to echo a little bit what Mr. Pawlowski said as the second questioner today. By the time you get this deep into the lineup, it's getting difficult to come up with new and creative questions that haven't already been asked by our colleagues. So I'm just going to change the flavor around the education a little bit, and you're probably going to say, yeah, I've kind of been there, done that already, Mr. Vidal, but I'm going to hit it again anyways. I come from northern Saskatchewan. You talked about the Treaty Commissioner in Saskatchewan, some of the good work done there, but I grew up with a lot of First Nations neighbors, friends, teammates, colleagues, have worked with them in my time as mayor and whatnot, and I guess where I'm coming from is I realize that that's not the case for all Canadians from coast to coast. I've had that privilege of having that experience and that relationship. We've talked a lot about education, and in your opening comments, you even talked about kind of the TRC recommendation number 93, where the education component should be part of. And I guess, my comments the other day were a little bit, maybe expressed some frustration around the picking number 94 and not having 93 done with it, because the education component is so important as you referred to in your opening comments. You talked about this being kind of the symbolic component. So I guess my question, and it's following up a little bit on what MP Kwan said as well, is beyond just the citizenship guide, there's many people that will never swear a citizenship oath because we were born in Canada. There's many people that are citizens of Canada that will never go through the new process that we're talking about now. It's very, very important that we educate those people as well to some of the history and the relationships. You referred to residential schools and the story about your hairdresser, and I guess I'm just want to give you the opportunity to talk more about how we become successful at educating all Canadians about some of the history, about some of the very important aspects of treaties and relationship, and not just new citizens.
Like I just mentioned, it's really important that that education occur, and I mean, nowadays, you know, there's virtual, there's all different platforms that you can provide education, and you know, I always think of Gord Downey of, you know, Tragically Hip, and how he only learned about the plight of First Nations Indigenous people when he was an adult. And so you know, it's really important, like I said, that you start with the younger ages, but you continue that education until people understand our history and how we came to be, and how, you know, why there's so many disparities in our community in terms of you know, the suicides, the housing issues, and, you know, the addictions, and it just goes on and on. That people need to understand where that stemmed from, and so to me, education is so important.
Following a little bit further down that path, you know, we've heard from the minister the other evening, or the other day on Tuesday or Thursday or whatever day it was, about the extensive consultations that were done around, you know, this recommendation about this piece of legislation. But in the context of education and some of the work being done around call to action number 93, could you maybe talk about what would be effective in the context of consultation around that? That is the education component. Is there enough consultation being done around that? And has it started? Who should be involved? What do you see that looking like?
Well, I always advocate that for consultation, and especially with our leaders, but it depends on what aspects that you're going to be consulting on. Like if it's more technical, you'd go to the educators, but if it becomes political, then it's important that the leadership are at the table when decisions are being made. I mean, you know, for First Nations in the history of this country, decisions have always been made for us. But then there's also a lot of documents out there that we can extrapolate information. You have RCAP, you have, you know, in Alberta, the Red Paper, you have TRC and Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women. And, you know, the list goes on in terms of the reports and some of the information that's gleaned from those reports. And I think it's important, you know, that we don't reinvent the wheel, you know, moving forward, but you know, yeah, it's important that First Nations are at the table in any type of consultation.
Thanks very much, Ms. Patras. In view of the time, I'm going to ask the indulgence of the Liberal members of our group to forego the last question so that we may organize the second hour of the meeting, and which will also require dealing with Mr. Vierson's matter. And then we also don't have too much time to extend the meeting because I have house duty, and I'm sure there are other busy individuals among the committee as well. So right now we're going to suspend and prepare for the second part of the meeting. Meeting is suspended. resume this meeting of the Indigenous and Northern Affairs Committee with presentations now from our next three guests, and starting off with National Chief Elmer St. Pierre from the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples. You have 6 minutes, Mr. St. Pierre. Please go ahead.
Sorry about that. Thanks a lot, Bob, and see a few people I know. Lorraine Whitman from the Native Women. My name is Elmer St. Pierre. I am the National Chief of the Congress of Aboriginal People. First of all, it's always been our tradition to offer tobacco when we exchange our views and just talk in friendship. The Congress of Aboriginal People is one of the 5 national Indigenous organizations recognized by the Government of Canada. We represent off-reserve, status, non-status, and Métis and Southern Inuit. CAP is also the federal voice for our provincial and territory members. We have a long history of having to fight for recognition of our grassroots people. We've been working since 1971. We are celebrating our 50th anniversary this year. In 2016, the Cap Daniel decision ruled that non-status Métis are Indians under the Constitution and the federal responsibility. Few things that come to mind. The citizen oath is a very important symbol. New Canadians should know that the treaties and the importance as the Constitution itself. All Canadians should understand that fact. Symbols need to be backed up by action. Treaties are not just in the past. Many communities today don't have recognition or land claims statement. They need action to protect their rights and for the Indigenous people. We cannot forget the other 93 calls to action. There are still recommendations from the Royal Commission on Aboriginal people that needs action. In 2018, CAP and the Government of Canada signed a political accord to work toward including our people in federal policies. Supporting this accord is also a necessary step toward reconciliation. The political accord is only one of many ways to represent the rights of our people in government policies. The distinct base model is a barrier in our country, our grassroots people. We heard today a lot of people talking about the UNDRIP as well as this body here under the Citizen Act. Unfortunately, CAP has not had the opportunity to be involved in these constitutions or these consultations, and we seem to be left out. And it's only been in the last week that we got invited to this meeting, and we don't know what ourselves. We don't know who is doing what anymore, and CAP represents our people, our Métis people, and the Constitution does say Indians, Métis, and Inuits. And at some point, I'm maybe getting off topic, but the government has decided that the CAP's grassroots people don't fall within that category. We speak for our own people, our membership, our our grassroots people right across Canada, from Labrador right to BC. And education is another big issue. Like the newcomers should know who we are and what we stand for, because you sit, you talk to someone, and sometimes they say, "Oh, you're an Indian? You're an East Indian?" Say, "No, we're from Canada. We're one of the first people." And we get talking, and it's really surprising. But one of our biggest problems is I guess you might as well say, the racism and the discrimination that CAP has to go through to try to get to these meetings. And sometimes it's a last minute thing. And most of the time we don't even get to speak. And if we do, it's normally about a half an hour, an hour before it's time, then they throw it at us. Okay, you have a chance to speak. That doesn't give us time to put something together. But I wish I could say I knew more about the citizenship. But if we're not consulted in it, then John, how can we put our 2 cents in, more or less?
Now, Chief St. Pierre, you're going to be angry with me because I have to interrupt you, because the translation has been interrupted, so we're not hearing the French. So we're going to just see if we can solve that problem right now, Mr. Clerk. You know the issue?
Yes, Mr. Chair, it seems to have stopped and mysteriously come back. So we'll see if we can continue, but I do hear the French interpreters now.
Okay. So Elmer, you got about a minute to go. Start up again and finish her off.
Well, at this point in time, Bob, I'd like to thank yourself. I finally see Kathy down in the bottom corner, Kathy McLeod. Thank you, Kathy. And again, a good friend of ours, Lorraine Whitman. And I imagine I probably know a few other ones here, but I'd like to thank you for inviting CAP to be at this table, and hopefully in future meetings that you're chairing, Bob, that we're there and we can speak and give enough notice ahead of time, because that'd be a pleasure to be able to know what's going on in our country, especially with our Aboriginal people. Thanks.
Thanks, Elmer. And so we move on now for 6 minutes to President Whitman from the Native Women's Association. Please go ahead.
Well, Alan Chair. Good afternoon. Deloise Lorraine Whitman, Grandmother White Sea Turtle. I am the president of Native Women Association of Canada, and I am speaking to you today from unceded traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq Ilmu people. Kwekwe, again, welcome. I would like to thank the Government of Canada and the members of the House Standing Committee on Indigenous and Northern Affairs in particular for inviting me here today to talk about Bill C-8 and the proposal to change the oath of Canadian citizenship to recognize the rights of Indigenous people. It has been more than 5 years since Justice Murray Sinclair released the final report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission after its multi-year study of the horrors that occurred behind the walls of Canada's Indian residential schools. I commend the Government of Canada for committing to act upon all of the 94 calls to action contained in that report. I also understand in just 2 days, you will be doing your line-by-line review of the proposed Bill C-8, and that I am speaking to you at what can only be described as the last minute. I hope that the members of Parliament sitting around the table will excuse the fact that NWAC seems to be offering an opinion so late in the game. The truth is, it was only last week that we were advised about the contents of Bill C-8 and the committee's work. If you have further legislation that will affect the lives of Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA+ people in Canada, we would be pleased to be part of the discussion right from the start. At the same time, you will hear from the male-led Indigenous organizations. I urge you to keep in mind that NWAC, which has been in existence since 1974, is the largest organization representing the Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA+ people in Canada. When you consult with us, you are consulting with grassroots First Nations, Métis, and Inuit women in every part of Canada. But moving on to the matters at hand, we are extremely glad to see that the government is going forward on this recommendation of the TRC. I believe that all of us around the table would agree that far too many Canadians who were actually born in this country lack a basic understanding of the history of colonialization that shaped the relationship between Canada and the Indigenous people. Too few Canadians have been taught about the importance of First Nation, Métis, and Inuit, not just to the history of this country's formation, but to the present day realities. Most do not realize that when ore is extracted from the ground, it is being taken from our traditional territory. And in many cases, it's been extracted based on the agreements we call treaties. They do not know that when trees are cut, it's because we have agreed to share the bounty of our ancestors with settlers. To have that reflected in the oath of citizenship is indeed an important step to righting some of the wrongs and injustices that were revealed by the inquiries of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We agree with the changes in wording you have made in the original TRC call to action to recognize the three distinctive groups of Indigenous people who call Canada home. I think it is fair to say that Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA+ people, despite the resilience, have suffered exponentially under colonialism. The national inquiry that examined the root causes of why so many of us are murdered or go missing found that there has been nothing short of a genocide. For that reason, we believe the realities of gender must also be reflected in the oath of citizenship and accompanying guidebook that all new Canadians must affirm that they understand the importance of Indigenous women to the land we now call Canada. I close today by commending your efforts. I hope that this legislation does finally become law 5 years after the release of the report of the TRC. And I look forward to the day when I can congratulate you for fulfilling all the calls to action of the TRC and the calls for justice of the national inquiry. Walaliak, merci beaucoup, and thank you for listening to my words.
Thank you. Very well presented, Ms. Whitman. And now we go for a final 6-minute presentation from Mr. Cardinal. Eric, please go ahead.
Bonjour.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify during these proceedings. I'm testifying here as an individual. I wear a number of hats. First of all, I teach Aboriginal law. For some 15 years, I've had the very great pleasure of conveying my passion for Aboriginal law to university students. At present, I'm teaching a course entitled Canadian Law and Aboriginal People at the Université de Montréal. I'm also Vice President of ACOSIS Advisory Services, an Aboriginal Indigenous organization that provides training and support in governance for organizations, Indigenous community organizations. I participate in negotiations with the federal government. On the whole, I have been in Indigenous law and policy for some 25 years. The issue of recognizing ancestral and treaty rights is part of my daily life. I'm very honored to be able to speak here today on Bill C-8, an act to amend the Citizenship Act, which is intended to respond to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's call to action number 94. First of all, I'd like to applaud the initiative of this bill, which is a response to the government's commitment of implementing the Commission's call to action and to foster reconciliation between Indigenous people and Canadians. I would like, however, respectfully to submit that the text, the wording as proposed in the bill, does not really meet the initial intention. The objective of the bill, as presented in its accompanying summary, is to include in the oath of citizenship a solemn promise to respect ancestral and treaty rights of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. But the new formula, both for the oath and for the affirmation, do not ask people to respect Aboriginal rights, but to respect the Constitution. This is what it says. I will faithfully observe the laws of Canada, including the Constitution, which recognizes and affirms the Aboriginal and treaty rights of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. So the new citizen is going to respect the Constitution, not ancestral and treaty rights. Some might call this a theoretical or semantic nuance, but I don't believe it is. I think it's a nuance fundamental to the principles of nation-to-nation relationships between the Crown and Aboriginal Indigenous people. As you must know, ancestral rights are inherent rights. They exist independently of recognition by the state, be it through the Constitution or otherwise. Oaths should, therefore, have people promise to respect ancestral and treaty rights without necessarily referring them back to the Constitution. The term Constitution is not used correctly either. Now I'm speaking as a professor of law, but in Canada, the Constitution is a combination of laws and acts which organize the institutions of Canada and determine our fundamental rules. The Constitution is not a single document. It is a combination of acts, orders, court decisions, and constitutional convention. I would like to point out that Section 35 of the Constitution Act of 1982 is itself a promise by the Crown towards Indigenous people, a promise that has not been carried out in full, kept in full. Many nations are still negotiating or waiting for their rights to be recognized by the state. In the interpretation of Section 35, the Supreme Court restricted its scope, allowing the government in some cases to infringe on ancestral and treaty rights. So if we want to be fully consistent with the concept of reconciliation and the principle of nation-to-nation relations, I think any reference to the Constitution should be removed, and the oath should simply refer to respect for the ancestral and treaty rights of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Thank you. Thank you, and I congratulate you on your work.
Well, thank you very much, and well within the time allotted. So in order to accommodate the rest of the meeting, including Mr. Vierson's matter, we're going to hear from each of the parties with the 6-minute round of questioning. And then that, I think, will take us to enough time to deal with the other matter. So we'll have Ms. McLeod, Mr. Van Couverden, Ms. Normandan, and Ms. Kwan. And Kathy, please go ahead for 6 minutes.
Thank you, and very pleased to see some familiar faces here today, and appreciate your testimony, because sometimes what seems like a simple bill turns out to be a little bit more complicated and specific words obviously really matter within the bills. But I do first of all want to pick up on National Chief St. Pierre's point about this is an important symbol, and certainly from all the witnesses, it sounds very well supported from the comments by all the individual parties. This seems like a well supported motion in terms of moving forward. of course, there's some conversation around whether there should be some massaging of the actual words that have had a number of different iterations. So I guess my first question, the government, even though it has not implemented UNDRIP legally, they have made a commitment to the concepts of the UN Declaration, which sort of talk to the issue of free, prior, and informed consent. So I guess my question is both to, again, Mr. St. Pierre and Ms. Whitman, to what degree have you been kept apprised of the various iteration and language that this has taken from what was originally within the TRC to, as you can see, it's had a number of iterations. And, do you believe that your organization should be completely engaged and be part of giving consent to move things forward? So if you could, maybe Mr. or Ms. Whitman and then Mr. St. Pierre on, to the degree that you have been engaged in the process, which clearly the Liberal government has said it would do.
Okay, well, Lalin, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity for the question. But in saying that, we had signed an accord in 2019 with the Crown that we would be sitting at the tables with our other INOs, so that we would be able to be inclusive as we do, represent, and we do advocate for the women, our girls, and our 2S LGBTQ QIA plus community. And I feel that being part and sitting at the tables answers the questions of our grassroots women. We have been, as you know, with the National Inquiry, the findings of being a genocide, it certainly makes it difficult for myself as a leader if I'm not at the table speaking and advocating for the women and defending their rights is what I'm asked to do on their part. We certainly need to be part of being at the tables and being included. And it's from the lens and the views of the Indigenous women. Our society has been run in a matrilineal way where the women have been the leaders in the system and in the group. And when we're excluded at the tables, it makes it difficult for us to be able to truly start putting our voices at the table.
So were you
for the women?
Yeah, were you given the different changes in language and the reasons? Were you part of the discussion around the language and the language changing?
No, I hadn't been included in any of that part. Just 2 weeks ago, as I had mentioned, we were included in this conversation, which I certainly appreciate. Thank you.
Okay. And National Chief St. Pierre, what about for yourself, where, as we say, we've had different iterations of wording? Would you say that your organization has been included in every step? And, because of course the government has made a pretty significant commitment in terms of how it's going to move forward, co-development of legislation. And of course, this is a so it should have been easy to have a very comprehensive process.
Thank you, Ms. Cloud. No, we haven't. This is, like Lorraine said, about a week and a half ago, we got the invitation, and as well, we got an invitation that we could speak at this meeting. Prior to that, we've had no contacts, we were never had consultation with the new Citizen Act, nor are we consulted on any of the things that's happening with the Liberal government. Sometimes it's hard to even get in touch with the Minister Bennett. And our big thing is if we don't know what's happening, then John, and if we're not sitting at these tables like this one here, how are we ever going to know? Because our people are not being represented. I think you mentioned something about the UNDRIP. That there, we had no consultation. It was MNC, Assembly of First Nation, and ITK. They were the ones that put the UNDRIP together. we had, I think it was a total of 3 hours to be able to sit and talk. And it was only word changes that we were able to do because we didn't have the time to get straight into the whole act.
So I would think it would be fair to say that although you are supporting this legislation because it is something we've been waiting 5 years for, that it did not meet, again, a simple piece of legislation that did not meet what the Liberals portray as co-development or even any sort of form of free, prior, and informed consent, which of course Section 19 of the UN Declaration calls for free, prior, and informed consent before legislation is tabled that impacts
Ms. McLeod,
Indigenous
you're about a minute over. Sorry about
thank you.
I think we get the point. So we'll move on now to Mr. Van Couverden for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses for coming today and for sharing your insights and for providing so much perspective on the process and making sure that you are heard and that your community's voices are heard on this. And I hope it leads to further consultations and more fulsome discussions. My question first, I'm joining you today from Halton, which is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and the Huron-Wendat, the Ottawa-Darren, the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas, the Credit First Nation, and many others. And I'm very grateful to be sharing this land. My question today is for Ms. Whitman, and I bring greetings, Ms. Whitman, from my friend Sherry Seville, who is a grandmother, lives in my community, and she says hi. We were chatting just the other day because we share a birthday, which was on Friday. And my question to you is around education. Certainly, this is a great step forward for newcomers to provide them with some perspective, perhaps a little bit of insight on what Canada is and who Canada is and who it's always been. But for people like me who were born here, how can we ensure that this citizenship oath and ceremony goes beyond the ceremony? What types of education do you think would be helpful or necessary to ensure that it's not just something that's read, that it's something that's understood and participated in? And how do you think that can have an impact on settler people like me and people who are born here in Canada, who might only ever do a citizenship ceremony or oath electively? They decide to go to the library one day and do one. But how can we contribute to a further understanding and more work? And I thank you for all of the work that you've done. Over to you.
Well, Alan, thank you for the question. I had attended a citizenship in Wolfville 2 years ago where we had inclusive, I had done the opening remarks, also the opening prayer. I had the regalia on. And for people to be able to do the oath, it's so important that education is so important, not only for the, the new immigrants that are coming in, but for all Canadians as a whole. And we're seeing a lot of that, a lot of conflict in that today. But I am aware that in Nova Scotia, with the citizenship, we do have a pamphlet that's available that gives some of the information of the First Nations in Nova Scotia, the Mi'kmaq. We just have the one tribe. Some of the treaties that's been taking place, some of the cultural component. And I think it's important that in each area, because we are a very large, diverse country as Canada is, and we have many tribes across, pamphlets would have to be, for those areas, wherever the oath be in that province or that territory, that a pamphlet of education be given to the new immigrants that are coming to Canada and letting them know that, we have lived here for thousands of years and we are the first peoples. Because when I was at the event in Wolfville that day, the immigrants and new Canadians that day were so appalled to see a woman up there speaking, and then to see an Indigenous person because they've never seen an Indian before. And in my cultural regalia, because in all of the other areas, they have different regalia as well. And I think that's an important component when we have an opening, the elders to be involved. We had drumming of the honor song that's there, welcoming, everyone in. We have our peace and treaties that have taken place in Mi'kma'ki, and this was the first discovery of the colonialism, and it started in the east and start going out to the western area of peoples that have lived strong through all of the hardship, the hurt and the pain we've gone through with colonialism. And education is such an important component. So I hope I was able to answer your question.
You certainly provided some important insight, and I appreciate it. My family's journey to Canada started in Nova Scotia, Pier 21. My mom got off of a boat in 1957 from Hungary. The boat obviously didn't leave from Hungary; it's a landlocked country, but that's where they left from. We're grateful to both the original people of Canada, but also to be able to have a safe place to live. So very grateful for that. My other question is, do you feel that these adjustments would be as inclusive as possible, given that Indigenous culture in Canada is probably just as diverse as the people that are coming to live here? My mother came from Hungary and my father came from Holland, and apart from being next to each other in the dictionary, they're probably not that similar. But there's countries that are even more diverse, obviously. But so is the culture of Indigenous people in Canada. Do you feel like we'd be as inclusive as possible? Say if somebody was doing the ceremony in Pacific Canada or in the northern parts of Canada or Nova Scotia, do you think that all cultures would be observed or included in the ceremony adequately enough?
I feel that with the Indigenous, I haven't seen much of it happening or occurring. That's why I thank each and every one of you today for asking me to be included in here, because the educational program, we really certainly need to emphasize that we are all treaty people. It was my ancestors, your ancestors that signed these treaties prior to, and we have to make sure that when we educate people, there's no guilt. It wasn't you personally, with all of the hardship that us as Indigenous people have endured over the years. And we need to start all of that education at grade primary. We need to let, institutions, and when I say institutions, I include governments as well with this. But, the education has to start from a young age to be able to be fulfilled. But at the same time, we need to also let them know that, we were willing, we opened our doors up for newcomers to be able to come in. We were able to give them food, clothing, wash. And, when these men had gotten off these boats, there were no women when they came off. They were very sick men. And we needed to be able to help them. And there were women, our families brought them in to be able to help them in the community. That needs to be stressed. So
I'm
I
sorry,
really feel
we're about a minute over, Ms. Whitman.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you very much, Walalan, Miigwech.
You need to help me
Ms.
there
Whitman.
on this one. Thank you so much. And now, Ms. Normandin, you have 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before beginning, I would ask the witness if it is possible for those who have speaking notes to forward them to the committee so that they can be translated. That will help us in our clause-by-clause examination of the bill, if possible, of course. Thank you. In the first panel, I said that the Bloc Québécois wanted Bill C-8 to be passed because of what it represents, but of course there are questions regarding the Constitution. That's why. And my question is to Mr. Cardinal. Could you please explain what inherent rights are in Aboriginal law? Because they've been talked about but not explained. Yes, inherent rights are rights that exist independently of whether they are recognized by the government or by the Constitution. That is extremely important to Indigenous people. Before New France, New England, and Canada was created, there had been people here for thousands of years. That ancestral occupation was well organized. That society had a very good organization. So when I teach Aboriginal law. I create a circle to show the normative foundation, and that circle is not fully included in what we call the Canadian Constitution, the foundation law of Canada. There is a recognition in Indigenous law that there is a pre-existing Aboriginal sovereignty and that those rights have not been fully recognized by the Canadian government, though increasingly they are. There are court decisions, the Constitution Act 1982, but inherent rights do not need recognition. For a long time, it was believed that the government or the Crown would grant rights, but that is not so. Inherent rights exist because people here existed before the sovereignty of the Crown came into play. Thank you. My next question, well, it's no secret that the Bloc Québécois would like to move an amendment that would remove any mention of the Constitution from the citizenship oath. I would like to hear you on whether it is at all necessary to have the Constitution mentioned in the oath or affirmation. As you will have understood from my comments, I don't think that a mention of the Constitution is needed. It's certainly not useful in the way that it's indicated. Ancestral and treaty rights of Indigenous people are fundamental, and that is what we want to see recognized. But they're important and fundamental not because they're recognized by the Constitution. On the contrary, the Constitution recognizes them because they are fundamental. So ancestral rights need to be recognized, and their recognition is fundamentally important and does not hinge on the existence or mention of the Constitution Act of 1982. Other witnesses were talking about the importance of recognizing treaties. That was the very purpose of Call for Action 94. But in constitutional law, Section 35 is a recognition of rights flowing from treaties. It does not protect the treaties themselves, and that is in itself a handicap and makes it less useful to use the Constitution to achieve the end of stressing that what's needed here is recognition of treaty and ancestral rights. Thank you. My next question is linked to what you've just said. You said that the Constitution Act of 1982 was an unfulfilled promise. How does it fail to recognize all the rights of Indigenous and First Nations and other people? Well, they mention claims, but claims means that some people seek recognition of rights that have not been recognized, that exist but have not been recognized. And they are thus not incorporated into the judicial framework of Canada. In Quebec, it's very important for nations to have their rights recognized. There is the concept of unceded territories that is recognized, but the rights on those unceded territories aren't recognized. For example, the right to self-determination means that governments, Indigenous governments, can be a third order of government, but the Constitution does not recognize that. To the point that in 1992, the Charlottetown Accord had provided for constitutional amendments to add wording on a third order of government, Aboriginal governments, Indigenous governments. That is an example of an Aboriginal right that is not currently recognized in the Constitution. In conclusion, perhaps.
Thanks very much. Ms. Kwan, you have the final 6 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. First off, to the Indigenous community leadership, I'm very sorry to learn that the government did not consult you with respect to the changes in the citizenship oath. I would have thought that that had been done. But in any event, I'm glad that you're here at this table now for us to receive your input, and hopefully going forward that this does not happen again in the future. On the issue around inheritance rights, this was something that was discussed in the last panel, and there was a suggestion in terms of making changes and amendments to the citizenship oath to add the words inheritance rights, titles, treaty, and agreement of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. So I just like to get the comments from first with Ms. Whitman with respect to that suggested change. And the idea is to add those words after the language that says, I will faithfully observe the laws of Canada, and then say and inheritance rights, titles, treaty, etc.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I do agree with that, but I also would like to have included the 2S LGBTQIA plus people. As we know that, we also have the two-spirited in ours, but we need to be inclusive of everyone no matter where they reside. So I think that's very important, that the language all be congruent and to be the same in the following, and that everyone be included here and no one left behind. And maybe with the Indigenous, because some people, when they look at Indigenous, are not really sure what the true definition is, because as you know, our government has changed us from, Native, Indian, First Nation, Aboriginal, Indigenous, and I think that a definition should be there, whether it be in the parameters of First Nation, Métis, and the Inuit all being there and being inclusive, as well as the, the LGBT community.
Thank you. Could I go to Mr. St. Pierre? I actually don't know where you're on the screen. Oh, there we are. Sorry, there's all over the place on the screen here. If I could get your comments, Mr. St. Pierre, please.
Yeah, the inherited rights, that's a really touchy subject. For simple reason, we've never given up our inherent rights. And what are they talking about, inherent right? Our inherent right to go out and hunt and fish for our families, our inherent right to get proper education, get proper health care, proper housing. That the rights is really broad, and unless we put something in there to say this is what the inherent right would mean. It's just like the Daniels case when it comes down that we're all Indians and we should be all treated the same, and that hasn't happened yet. So, if we want something passed under under this bill, it has to be pretty simple for the government to say yes. And because I would take, when you say inherent rights, I would think that you're talking about just what I said, the hunting and fishing and whatnot. So, that's my view on that.
Well, thank you. I would argue that the government who has not followed the rights of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples has caused a lot of the conflict. And had they actually recognized their inherent rights, perhaps we wouldn't be in those kinds of situations. And so I think the purpose of the citizenship oath is to ensure newcomers, I myself, as an immigrant, actually, it feels like 600 years ago now, that I joined with my family and swore the citizenship oath and became a Canadian. And back then, it didn't have such language. There was no information, in fact, about Canada's history. With the First Nations, Inuit, or Métis peoples. And so this is, I hope, a step forward in providing that education. And then with the citizenship oath right at the outset for newcomers to know that, that the rights of Indigenous peoples, the First Nations, the Métis and Inuit peoples must be respected. At all times. So I think that's the idea behind this. And of course, it speaks to the other calls for action under the TRC and the slowness in the rate in which those calls for actions are being acted on. And I think that too is another critical question. I'd like to actually just turn to the issue around education.
Well, 10 seconds, Ms. Kwan.
Okay. Well, in that case, I will say thank you to the witnesses for the comments.
Thank you for your understanding.
Oh,
yes.
Sorry, if I could actually raise this one point, Mr. Chair. At the last meeting with the minister, and the minister, because we had some technical difficulties, I had to leave early. And so we were asked to provide written submissions to him and by way of questions. And so to which I've done, and we still haven't received a response yet. Particularly, I was interested in getting the list of groups to which the government had consulted with respect to this bill and their comments related to it. So I wonder if we can get that information, Mr. Chair, before the deadline for submission for amendments today at 4 p.m.
I'll put that message in as soon as we're finished here. Thank you for that. Okay. I want to, as Ms. Kwan suggested, thank our witnesses, Ms. Whitman, Mr. Cardinal, Mr. St. Pierre. We're trying to get this done. And so we've got a little more hard work to do, but hopefully we can do it to everyone's satisfaction, as hard as that is to do. So once again, to our witnesses, thank you so much for your attendance today. It was great to have you with us. And now we move on to the matter of the motion.
Thank you, Lorraine. Good to see you.
Thanks, Lenore. Okay. Waves all around. And Mr. Viersen, you have a motion. Would you state the motion, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to just see if we can get a vote done today on the motion to pursue a study pursuant to Standing Order 1082, that this committee to undertake a study on the cancellation of the Keystone XL pipeline and the potential loss of the Line 5 pipeline on Northern and Aboriginal communities, that this study take into account but not be limited to the impact on Indigenous businesses, jobs, economic prosperity, and self-determination, and mutual benefit agreements, as well as the effort of the federal government to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and that the committee report its findings to the House. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see on a speaker's list, Mr. Ananda Sangari.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank Mr. Viersen for bringing this study forward. We've looked at the wording. I think this is a study that is well suited to be discussed at Natural Resources. I know a similar motion is there right now. I do, as a government, we recognize the importance of Keystone, and we've advocated for it for a number of years, as the Prime Minister has reiterated, as well as our ministers. But this is definitely a study that I think is warranted through the Natural Resources Committee and not through here. And I think we are willing to dispose of the matter today if we're able to go to a vote.
Mr. Viersen.
Yeah, I would just say that I specifically worded this motion so that it is definitely in the wheelhouse of this committee. This is an urgent matter, as the decision has just been made. I think that there is an ability for the government to continue to pursue the Keystone XL pipeline that one may have been passed, but the line 5, that's an urgent matter that needs to be addressed by the government. There are treaties in place that would allow for redress on this, and I would love for this committee to study this forthwith.
Seeing no further speakers, I'd like to call a vote on this, and we can do this simply by a show of hands, or we can on division, or we can ask the clerk to take the poll. So could I ask those in favor of the motion to put your hand up so that I can see it on the screen? I see 1, 2, 3, 4. I see 1, 2, 3, 4. And those who are not in favor of the motion. And I believe the motion is lost. Mr. Viersen, thanks for that. And ladies and gentlemen, Mr. INAN Sangari, hand still up, or are you done?
Yeah, it's a new issue. Just in response to Ms. Kwan's question at the end, they are working diligently to get the information to her as soon as possible.
Hey, Ms. Kwan.
Thank you very much for that. And in light of the fact that we were supposed to submit our amendments by 4 p.m. today, and we have not received all of the information that I think we should have, and I just want to make sure then from the committee, if submission for amendments does not meet the 4 p.m. Eastern time timeline, that we would still be able to do so.
Let me ask the clerk for an opinion.
Any member of the committee can move an amendment on the floor during clause by clause. That deadline will still apply to any non-members of the committee. But members of the committee that do miss that deadline, it will just mean that their amendment may not be included in the package of amendments that is prepared by the legislative services. But they still have the right to bring an amendment on the floor during clause by clause.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all the members of the committee. We have a busy Thursday ahead of us, and we will see you all then. I declare this meeting adjourned.
you.